A couple of weeks ago, Matt from Matt's Off-Road Recovery gave me a call and asked if I'd be interested in building an engine for his 6-wheel drive off-road Ram truck. He did mention it was going to be supercharged, so of course I had to jump at the opportunity because I love V8s, I love turbos, I love forced induction, and I love cool, out-of-the-ordinary projects. So that checked all the boxes for me. So of course, I jumped on the opportunity. So what are we gonna be building? Well, this guy right here. It's a 6-liter LQ4, commonly referred to as an LS, or it's part of the LS engine family. And he requested that we build him an engine that is
a mean, supercharged, mellow, mild motor for this truck.
So I think we can definitely oblige to that request. Now, I made a suggestion, and I want you guys to help out and go over to Matt's channel and tell him what you think we should do. But I suggested that we build this as a 408 stroker and supercharge it. Build it with a fairly mild camshaft. We don't need a huge RPM ceiling. Matt did have a couple of requirements that he gave me, like we didn't want to necessarily spin the thing much over 5,500 RPM. And we have to run a mechanical cooling fan, which that'll come into play a little bit later on when we get to like accessory drives and stuff like that. But I've got my marching orders. He dropped off the engine a couple of weeks ago. So now it's time to open this thing up and see what's on the inside. We are hoping it's going to be a perfectly usable core, but you never know because sometimes when you get an engine from a junkyard, well, sometimes it looks okay from the outside and what's on the inside, well, that's really what counts. So today we are 1, going to clean up this engine, 2, going to take it apart, and 3, hopefully not find any surprises. So let's jump right in. So the first thing that we are going to do is just strip off a lot of these external parts that we're not going to reuse. Nothing wrong with them, they just aren't going to work for what we have in mind. Plus, it's going to allow me to actually clean the block and stuff underneath, because I hate working on dirty engines. Yep. And I'm going to start the cleanup process right away. Pretty much every fastener that we pull off of this thing, I'm just going to stick in the parts washer. That way we can run it and get all the extra grease and grime cleaned off of them. Because a lot of these fasteners, some of them we're going to reuse. Gaskets though, let's see if we can make this. Oh, right in the trash. Can I get 2 for 2? Yeah, he's good. And you guys probably won't believe it because you probably can't see the Napa trash can. Now, one more thing that I'm going to do, I'm actually going to take the rockers off so I can get rid of the push rods, which actually right now that's a pretty good sign. Everything looks clean. But that way all the valves will be shut, because that way I can steam clean the outside of the engine and not worry so much about if a little bit of water gets inside the exhaust ports or the intake ports. We're probably not going to be reusing these heads or a lot inside this engine, but you still want to kind of protect everything as best you can. And even parts like this that I probably won't reuse, or actually definitely won't reuse because the heads are going to have a different shape rocker. There's a clue. I will throw them in the parts washer just because when we store them, they won't be oily and making a mess. Yeah, just like the 5.3 that I tore down, these, the push rod hole in the rocker body is starting to wear out. But that's kind of normal with miles. And we will cover this back up just temporarily. So either this engine belonged to a lumberjack or someone had a family of small rodents living in there, and judging by the seeds or whatever those are, turds maybe, I think it's the latter. We've got the 6-liter stripped down to about a long block, and all the cleanup work is done on the outside, and it's already looking a million times better. I hate working on dirty, greasy engines. I mean, like, they'll get your sockets all packed up with grease and grime, and this is just so much easier and nicer to work on. So I'm glad we took the time to clean it up. We're ready to open it up and see what we can find on the inside, but the plan for this engine has already changed multiple times, and depending on what we find on the inside, it may change a little bit further. The plan initially started out with Matt's desire just to have a little bit more power than a naturally aspirated junkyard LS could provide. So we thought, hey, LSA superchargers are pretty cool. I ran one on the Copa truck for quite a while. I love the power curve that it produces, so I thought it would be a natural fit for the off-road 6x6. But then as we talked a little bit more, the more I realized that Matt's #1 priority needed to be strength and reliability, because he wanted to be able to throw any one of his team members behind the wheel of this thing and let them basically put their foot to the floor all day long in the desert heat and not have to worry about anything failing or breaking on this engine. So we figured, at the very least, we probably should upgrade like the pistons and rods just to give it a little bit more strength. But then we kind of thought, all right, if we're going to take the engine apart to put better pistons and rods in it, the cylinder heads are going to have to come off. So, as a car guy often thinks, rather than putting the stock heads back on, why not upgrade to something a little bit, not stronger, but something that has a little bit more airflow, but I guess technically also is stronger and will allow the supercharger to bolt on a little bit easier. So then we kind of started evolving that plan a little bit further, and it went like, okay, if we're going to put new heads on and a new piston, you know, a new connecting rod, the whole thing's coming apart anyway, why not potentially replace the stock crankshaft at the same time? So rather than the original 3.622 stroke 6-liter crankshaft, why not throw in a 4-inch stroke crank, which will increase the displacement to 408 cubic inches, which will allow the engine to produce more low-speed torque, because remember, about a 5,500 RPM ceiling is what Matt spec'd out for this thing. So why not go all the way? And I think that's the plan right now. But like I said, plans may change depending on what we find on the inside. So let's jump right in, let's open it up and see what we got to work with. Oops. I got the seal out. I have to hold on to the tool better. There. Just looks like normal wear and tear. Now head bolts, we could save these, but we are not going to reuse them, so that's where they belong. I did, however, need to find out if these corner bolts were shorter than the rest, which they are. So that means it's a little bit earlier block, and not a big deal. Just when we order the head studs, we have to remember it has the short ones on the corner. All right. No visible damage to the cylinder heads. And I think this is a flat top. This may be an LQ9. Not that it makes much difference, but that's pretty cool. As we go along, I'm just taking out any sensors and keeping them separate. That way nothing gets damaged in storage or cleaning. No abnormalities on the head gasket. Cylinder walls are smooth. Now the other interesting thing is, if you remember, the top of the push rod actually on this one was fairly worn. The bottom is actually still in pretty good shape in the lifter. All the wheels look pretty good. I mean, just normal wear and tear, but nothing like damaged. Oh, there's the rest of the coolant. And oil. A little sludgy. No like bearing chunks or anything major. So far it looks like this engine was pretty well cared for. I've noticed like the oil pan gasket was not original, which means basically throughout the life of this car, whoever owned it, they fixed leaks, so they probably did their maintenance, stuff like that. And there's the rest of the mess. Timing cover, you are next. And then there's the oil pump. Followed by the timing chain and sprocket, which these can pretty much go right in the trash. Now you can reuse your cam retaining plate, but I don't recommend it simply because if you look on the back side, there's a little gasket and that just helps divert oil pressure where it needs to go. I also recommend saving these. I mean, a stock cam isn't really going to make that much power, but if you got like a Gen 4 and you want to do a DOD delete and you don't want to do a lot of tuning, a stock cam can be perfect. And there's no abnormal wear on the lobes or anything like that, so this could be reused if you want it. And on to the bottom end. If you have ever wondered what people are talking about when they say 24X or 58X in terms of LS engines, this guy right here, this is the crank position sensor reluctor wheel. This has 24 teeth on it. The Gen 4, which is the slightly newer version of the LS, has 58 teeth on that. Don't ask me why they changed, but I guess they figured more is better. So we started by cleaning the outside of the engine, but we can't forget about the inside. Now a lot of this we are not going to reuse, but the oil pan, for example, this is perfectly the part, and we're gonna reuse it, but we can't put it on like this, obviously, so we're gonna make it spotless. So I didn't film every last bit of cleanup, but I spent most of the mornings today just getting all of the, well, pretty much all the parts cleaned up, even the stuff that we're not gonna use, just because I hate dirty parts, even if they're just gonna be stored. So a few things got thrown away that we definitely won't reuse, like push rods and the oil pump and stuff like that. All the things that were 99% gonna reuse are fully cleaned up and in this tote. So we get like the oil pan, winch tray, pickup tube, front cover, rear cover, valley cover, valve covers. That's all cleaned up. Old seals are removed from them. They're basically ready to be reinstalled with new gasket seals and O-rings and whatnot. This is the bin of things I'm probably 99% not gonna use. So like the pistons, I even went ahead and I just got them cleaned up so they're nice and shiny, protected them with some plastic wrap in case, you know, who knows, but at least that way we can store them and they'll be, you know, sealed up and out of the way. So cleanup work is done, except for the block. Now I got a little bit of work to do on this guy, and the main thing that I like to do with every engine that I have apart is basically deburring them, because when they machine these things, you know, it's a production line and these edges are just like razor sharp. So I get the carbide out on the die grinder, I deburr everything, and theoretically that strengthens it up a little bit just because it prevents, like it gets rid of those little stress risers they call them, which could initiate a crack. Like I said, probably wouldn't ever happen, but the other thing that we can do is kind of help improve oil drain back just a little bit. It's upside down right now, but in the top of the cam tunnel, for example, there's a few spots around the lifters where oil has to drain back. So from the cylinder heads, the oil flows down, and there's, let's see, there's that little shape there. There's one in the center, and they're just kind of cast, and they have a bunch of flash around them. Maybe it's a little bit better to demonstrate up there. And so just by kind of grinding and smoothing out some of those areas, you can allow the oil to drain back to the oil pan just a little bit more efficiently. So no risk of slicing your fingers open as you work on it. Improved oil drain back, and theoretically like 1% more strength added to the block just by getting rid of any of those little stress risers. So that's what we'll take care of now. And then pretty much all the operations that we can do on the block here are done, except for measuring. I do want to just get the bores measured up, and I do have that equipment, which we'll take care of in just a little bit. Now, other than cleaning up the reusable parts like the valve covers and timing cover and oil pan and all that, block prep is probably the most time-consuming part of an engine DIY rebuild. Now, a lot of the stuff that I've done here, you could argue is unnecessary, especially like deburring the block, because it made it 170 or 200 or however many thousand miles this engine has on it with all those little burrs and stuff on there. But just because you can leave it be or leave it how it was doesn't mean that's like the best way to do it. In my opinion, why not take the extra time to make this block just a little bit nicer? And this is one of the areas that I specifically am talking about down here, like where the oil drains back. I'll try to zoom in. But you can see how nice and smooth that cavity or that passageway is now, where before it was all jagged and rough looking. You can kind of see the other side of it there. And there's one in each of the four corners of the engine. But that'll just make the oil drain back into the pan that much smoother. And on top of that, the added benefit is whenever we're working on this engine, we're not going to cut ourselves, because literally every machine surface that GM put on this block, you know, from the front water pump timing cover area to the cylinder head to the valley cover and so on, each one of these edges had almost a razor sharp burr on it. So we just take some time with a carbide and we smooth those all out. And theoretically, yeah, it makes it just a teeny tiny bit stronger by getting rid of any of those little jagged edges that could make a crack initiate. Now, that doesn't mean it probably ever would happen, but again, it's one of those things where, in my opinion, it's better to take the extra time. Now, speaking of time though, we have created a lot more work for ourselves now that we've done all this, because as you can see, we've got little cast iron chips and shavings pretty much everywhere. So I have stripped this thing down as far as it possibly can be. I pulled out the front oil galley plug, pulled out the barbell on the back, pulled out the 2 screw-in oil galley plugs on the side. That way we can thoroughly clean this block, including the passageways, because yeah, there's probably a little bit of shavings that went in there. And on top of that, there's also oil sludge from years and years of use. So in order to do that, I went over to Summit. I grabbed just one of these basic engine cleaning brush kits. It's got a big bottle brush that we can use, you know, just for going down the bores and stuff like that. And then it's got a variety of smaller ones like this guy we can use in the lifter bores down here. And then it's got a bunch of really small ones for like the main bearing passageways and stuff like that, which you can't really see. But for example, there's a hole right through here. You know, we'll get up and clean that guy out. There's probably already a little bit of dirt on there, but everywhere that has a passageway, we need to clean up. So we'll go outside, we'll use some degreaser, we'll use a steam cleaner and that brush set, and we'll get this block as clean as humanly possible. So the very last step that we need to take care of today is to get some good, accurate measurements on this block so we can determine what size pistons that we need to order. Now, whenever I'm building a high-performance engine, if I have the option, I prefer to keep the bore size as close to stock as possible. Now, that just leaves the most thickness on the cylinder walls, which helps make this stronger, especially in a boosted application. But oftentimes, as an engine has miles and age and stuff like that, the bores wear ever so slightly. They can become tapered where they're wider at the top and narrower at the bottom. They can become oval shaped. Often they'll wear a little bit more on the side here where the pistons kind of rock inside the bores. But the short version is I need to accurately measure this so then we can determine if we are going to keep the stock bore size and just hone it, or if we need to go 30 thousandths oversized. So the first thing that we got to do, measure the bore. So you grab your tape measure, boom, let's measure it. And it looks like we're 4 inches right on the money. So yeah, obviously that's not the accurate way to do it. A tape measure like that in American measures down to a 1/16 of an inch, which is like 0.0625 of an inch. So 62.5 thousandths increments either way. Not even close to accurate when we're talking about 30 thousandths of an inch oversized. So the next thing that we could do, come over here and grab a set of digital calipers, which these are actually pretty stinking accurate. We will get that zeroed out. Oops, this is hard to do one-handed. Get it zeroed out, okay? And then we can measure at least the top side of the bore. Now this guy's gonna come in somewhere right around 4 inches, so 3.997, or about 3 to 3.5 thousandths of an inch undersize, which obviously when the factory makes these, there's some room for tolerance. But even though this measures down to 0.5 of a thousandths of an inch, that's still not accurate enough. we need to measure down to 1/10 of a thousandth of an inch, which requires one of these guys here, a dial bore gauge. And to get it set up, you just have these different length doohickeys, I don't know what they called, and different length spacers. But for the range that we're going to measure here, we need the number 11, which is that guy. And then we also need to add the 8/100ths of an inch little washer, that guy there. But then we're not done. We have to take this guy and calibrate it. So we bring it over to, I forget the name, but the Precision C-clamp. We get this set at exactly 4.0000 inches. That's right, this will measure down to the 1/10 of a thousandth. So we'll use this with the dial bore gauge to get it set at 0, and then we can measure the bore top to bottom, side to side, to exactly figure out what the diameter is, see if it's got any taper in it, and see if we can just simply hone this or if we have to go 30 thousandths oversized. So basically what we're trying to do is get this dial here to read exactly 0 at its smallest, which we're within a very, very close amount right now, when the micrometer is set at 4.000. And I am ever so slightly off, so I'm going to just tweak the gauge or the scale. I think this should be it. I went the wrong way. Right there, 4.000. So at this point right here, it's 27 tenths over 4.000, or just under 3 thousandths of an inch. So it does have some wear, but not a lot. This one's even tighter. This is at 23 tenths. Measured down further in the bore. It's even tighter as it gets down lower. That's like 19 tenths. Now, just to give you guys an idea of how accurate this thing measures, the overbore, the most common overbore starting size is 30 thousandths of an inch over. So watch how many revolutions this takes to go 30 thousandths of an inch. In fact, the whole scale down here is 50 thousandths of an inch. So watch this. 10 over, 20 over, 30 over. And we're talking differences, you know, like that, tops. So I got all the measuring done, and I'm pretty pleased with the results, and spent a little bit of time crunching the numbers. Here's kind of what we came up with. I wrote down the largest dimension of all the bores, which we get there. It's pretty much a range from 23 tenths all the way up to, it looks like 27 tenths for cylinder number 1. And every single one of them had the biggest dimension here, like right across the top. They were much smaller across here, and as it got down to the bottom of the bore, it became much tighter as well. So I just recorded the maximum, so when it comes to ordering pistons and stuff like that, we got to know our baseline. So what do we got here? If we include the spec of the piston with the clearance, like say this may be the piston we run, it may not be, but we come down through this chart and it talks about how much extra clearance that we need. So this particular piston I've got circled is for 5 thousandths over bore, and that's how much extra you have to leave for the piston to expand and stuff. So total, we need to have 4 and 7.5 thousandths to 4 to 8.3 thousandths of an inch, or 83 tenths, which means, given the maximum dimension we have here, we have about 5.7 thousandths of an inch that we could hone out if we go with a 10 over piston, which is tight, but I think 5 thousandths is within the spec. Sorry, that was 5 over. So just to be safe, we may opt for a 10 thousandths over bore. That way we can put a torque plate on here, clean everything up, and have a really good surface finish when it gets honed. And then we have no risk of like being ever so slightly too big on the bore size. Speaking of sizes and dimensions, I also ran a bunch of numbers for the rotating assembly. And here's kind of what we came up with. We're shooting for a mid 9-to-1 compression ratio, but to do that, we need the dish. Where's the dish? We need about a 20 cc dish. This particular brand, they have 12, 14, and 25 cc dishes, which would get us, the 25 would be a little bit low because our heads are going to be right around 70 cc. That would get us a little on the low side. But if we ran the 14 cc dish, it's a little on the high side. You can kind of dial that in slightly with head gasket thickness, but I found another piston that has a 20 cc dish, which is going to be right on the money for about 9.5-to-1 compression, which is going to be perfect, I believe, on the 408 with a supercharger for something that spends a lot of time at a high duty cycle. You know, an engine that's going to be making a lot of power a lot of the time. It's going to be in a hot environment. We don't want to get too aggressive on compression. If this were like a street or strip engine where we're just making the occasional hit or a pull down the highway, I'd feel comfortable bumping up the compression. But on something that sees a lot of heat and a lot of power a lot of the time, exactly how Matt's going to use it, we want to stay a little bit more conservative. And technically, we could go even a little bit more. Like we could dial this thing back to maybe like 9-to-1. In fact, I think a factory LSA is about 9-to-1. But the point is, I guess the long way of saying this is, if you're going to be building an engine, make sure you know what your options are. Get yourself a spreadsheet like the one I've made here, so you can dial in everything like the bore, the stroke, the head gasket compressed thickness, the head gasket diameter. All these numbers are extremely critical when it comes to building an engine, because if you just buy parts off the shelf and you don't really pay attention to it, I mean, you could have an engine that has too low or too high of a compression ratio. You could have a piston that puts the quench in the wrong spot, which could lead to more detonation than you'd like. You could have all sorts of problems, so pay attention to the numbers. That's the long way of saying it. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'm really excited to see this engine come together. Next step for us, we got to get it off to a machine shop. I've got to get an order placed for all of the parts now that I know approximately what size I want to go with. Like I said, we're going to target a 10 thousandths overbore, and I feel we can safely accomplish that, having now measured the block. So we'll get some parts on the way, and next time you guys see this engine, we will be assembling it. So come back soon. Plus, don't forget, we have turbo trucks and other fun stuff we do here as well.